Hello everyone, Eber here with HardwareCanucks, and this is the Samsung Galaxy S9. Not the S9 Plus, but its little brother, the S9, and it's a successor to the very popular Galaxy S8 and the S8 Plus. I was actually fortunate enough to test those devices last year, and let's just say that I had a lot to discuss in terms of Samsung's design and software choices. And for those of you who watched the review, should get a rough understanding as to where I'm coming from and what my expectations and preferences are when it comes to a flagship Android device. Personally, I had mixed feelings about the S8, and it was just not my favorite device from last year, but again, smartphone reviews are always subjective. But let's talk about the S9 and what improvements Samsung has done to it to make it a compelling upgrade over last year's device or any other smartphone. So let's dive into it. But first, a quick message from our sponsor.
Welcome to your new keyboard training.
Thank you.
First, attach the magnetic wrist rest. It simply pops in. Don't forget about the USB pass-through port and the headphone jack to simplify your connectivity. You're the boss of the media control, which is right over here. Fiery red keycaps are included because this is a gaming product with RGB per key illumination. And under the hood, we've got cherry MX silver speed and blue switches for those legit actuations. And finally, don't forget about voice control. Enjoy your new X1 by Thermaltake. Check it out in the description below.
Alright, so what are the new changes? Let's analyze it step by step, and ultimately, you can decide if it's worth your hard-earned cash. First and foremost, the design, and honestly, it's not that different from the S8, at least when you look at it from an arm's reach. The S9 still features curved edges, smooth metal unibody construction, Gorilla Glass 5 both at the front and the back, which again is a fingerprint magnet. I have already noticed scratches at the back of my sample with just a month of usage, and it looks ridiculous. So a case or skin is highly recommended. Although I do want to mention that while a case could protect the rear end of the phone, it wouldn't necessarily protect the screen at the front, and here's why. You see, the curved screen design sort of blends in with the metal frame of the device. So when you install a case, that tiny gap is still prone to damage. A friend of mine bought the S8 last year, and she has already been through 2 replacements, which is mind-blowing considering it's only been a year, and this is a picture of a recent S8 device with a case installed, and it still has a cracked screen. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking: why not install an OtterBox case or any other military-grade material to give it the ultimate protection it needs? But that would add more weight, it would take away the physical aesthetics or the beautiful aesthetics of the device, and it just wouldn't make any sense purchasing the S9 in the first place, because the design is the most attractive element of the smartphone. I think we've reached peak smartphone design in 2018. Samsung brought their A game to the table with the introduction of the S8, and we saw competitors sort of take inspiration from that and implement them in their own flagship devices. Sure, they all look beautiful in person, but from a practicality standpoint, I just can't recommend phones with curved screens and glass backs. It's just not my taste. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that in the comments. Moving on to the display, well, nothing has actually changed in that area. You get the same 5.8-inch Super AMOLED screen with a QHD+ resolution. The screen-to-body ratio remains identical, so nothing super exciting, but hey, it's still one of the best displays I've encountered on a smartphone. Colors are super vibrant. If you've owned a Samsung device in the last few years, this should feel like home, albeit a little bit better due to the improvements in contrast ratio and a wider color space support. Samsung does include options for different color profiles. My pick was the basic mode, as the colors seemed more neutral to my eyes, especially coming from the Pixel 2. Also, fun fact, the Pixel 2 screen gets a lot brighter than the S9, so viewing content outdoors might not give you the best experience on the S9 when compared to the Pixel 2. That being said, the S9's brightness can be dimmed a lot lower than the Pixel, so at least that's nice. I still can't get over the curved screen while watching content. Remember, on my S8 review, I mentioned how the edges got reflective and it kind of got in the way when watching content or just watching video or something. It's the same story with the S9, and I didn't like that. Now, given the screen is so much flush to the metal frame, there's no room to hold the phone comfortably, and I've run into times where I would accidentally skip to another part of the video because The playback meter within the app, in this case YouTube, automatically detects my thumb's position and registers that timestamp, which I found to be really annoying. This is one of the downsides of a bezel-less smartphone. There's just no room to comfortably place your fingers around, and I think a case might come in as a solution once again because it adds a little bit more room around the edges for better ergonomics, but those are just my thoughts. By the way, Bixby is still here. I don't think Samsung's gonna let go of their virtual assistant anytime soon, and they've been adding updates to it since the S8 launch. To be frank, I've never bothered using it at all since I'm heavily invested into the Google ecosystem, and I'm a lot more comfortable using that over Bixby, and there are a few reasons for that. For example, on my Pixel 2, I can simply squeeze the device to activate Google Assistant, and I can ask it a certain question or maybe control my smart home devices. And it's pretty fast, it's consistent, it just works. Whereas with Bixby, well, that's a different story because you have to ask a question a certain way to get the right answer. And another thing is that it's not compatible with my smart home devices because Samsung or the Bixby is directly linked to Samsung's SmartThings, which is Samsung's separate smart home ecosystem. So that's another entity, and it just wouldn't work. So that's another reason why I didn't even bother using Bixby. However, Samsung has pre-built Google Assistant into the S9, so all you have to do is just hold onto the home button to activate Google Assistant, and you can ask it certain things and it'll just work right away. But the problem is that you're kind of competing with two virtual assistants on the same device. It's either Bixby or Google Assistant. So it's like, which one would you pick? It is confusing. You could ultimately turn off Bixby if you really want to and stick with Google Assistant on this device. But if you want to take advantage of some of the features that Bixby has, it's a good way. I mean, one, you could ask it to open a certain app and perform certain tasks, or Bixby Vision is a pretty cool feature. Essentially, you can use the camera to point at certain objects, and Bixby does a really good job pulling up results that are relatable to that object. So for example, if I point the camera to a gaming keyboard, it'll pull up appropriate results, which is pretty awesome. And I don't think Google can do that as of right now. It does have that feature, but it just can't detect certain objects. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, one of the things that I mentioned in my essay review was the inability to reprogram this physical Bixby button to something else. You still can't do that on the S9, unfortunately, but you can actually turn that button off or physically disable that button. So Bixby has finally given you the option to go into the settings and turn off that button to trigger Bixby. So if you accidentally keep hitting this button and when it triggers Bixby, then you can completely just turn it off. So that's nice. But the problem is that it's just one physical button that's just sitting there doing nothing. You can't really reprogram it, although I'm pretty aware that there are third-party applications that can do that. It's just that it would have been a lot nicer if Samsung could have offered that reprogrammable function on this button. So yeah, it's Bixby, so I really don't know what else can I talk about. I should also mention that the fingerprint reader at the back has been relocated to a more comfortable spot. It's easier to access when compared to the S8, but oddly, my review sample has some difficulties recognizing my finger at times. But hey, I'm glad that they've listened to us from last year's terrible placement. The S9 still features IP68 water and dust resistant rating. It's a must-have feature in 2018 at this price point, and Samsung gets bonus points for keeping the headphone jack, because most flagship phones don't come with one. And the internal DAC is fantastic. You won't have a problem driving high-end headphones like the Sennheiser HD 598s, plus Samsung does include a pair of AKG headphones out of the box, so you don't have to invest in a pair later on. Unfortunately, I can't comment on how those headphones sound because the provider for my review sample decided not to include one with my sample, so it's like, yeah, but hey, at least they've included one in retail models, so that's nice. Okay, so my software experience with the Esayan was alright. The main interface is relatively easier to navigate around with, albeit I'm typically not a fan of OEM skins on top of Android, but you can easily fix that with a third-party launcher like Nova and customize it the way you like. Unfortunately, it's still running Android 8.0 and awaiting the 8.1 update, so hopefully Samsung will roll that out soon. That being said, expect a ton of Samsung-related features on top of the OS. Bixby is one of them. There are a handful of other advanced features like Smart Say, one-handed mode, and other gesture controls. There's a separate theme store where you can download custom themes and wallpapers, although you have to pay for most of them. The Apps Edge folder lets you instantly access apps you use most often, although I typically leave them on my home screen, so not really sure who would take advantage of that. Samsung has still preloaded the S9 with their dedicated browser, email, calendar, gallery, and some other apps, Most of them can't be uninstalled, and if you're getting the device through a carrier, expect even a lot more bloatware. One of the things that completely threw me off while using the S9 was the ability to turn on mobile data on the go. And as much as silly as that may sound, hear me out for a second. You see, enabling data on most Android smartphones is pretty straightforward. All you have to do is pull down the Quick Settings tab and tap on the data toggle. It instantly enables data, and it's a quick and easy way, especially for people who have limited data plans. That's not the case with the S9, because Samsung, for some odd reason, decided to remove that toggle from Quick Settings. So if you need to turn on data, you'll have to navigate yourself through the main Settings app, tap on Connections, then Mobile Data, and then tap on the toggle. Trust me, it's been a brutal experience going through that process, and I honestly have no idea why Samsung decided to remove that feature. It was there on the S8. I just don't know why they removed it on the S9. It just doesn't make any sense. I mean, Samsung. Moving on, the S9 still features a 3000 mAh battery, just like the S8. I would keep your expectations pretty low, because battery life is respectable, but not great like the Google Pixel 2. There's so much stuff going on with the S9, like the Super AMOLED QHD Plus display, a faster processor, and of course, Samsung's skin running on top of Android. You can definitely get away throughout the day without plugging in, as long as you're not planning on using it heavily, for example, streaming music via Bluetooth, or constantly watching Netflix or YouTube. I was able to get around 3.5 to 4 hours of screen on time, and my usage consists of casually checking social media, watching a few YouTube videos, messaging, the usual stuff. I need to emphasize that battery life heavily depends on your usage. So if you are a heavy user, you're definitely not going to expect the greatest results on the S9. So I'd recommend a portable power bank just in case. And the good thing is that it actually charges via USB Type-C, and it supports Qualcomm's Quick Charge 2.0 protocol. Now, if I compare to something like the Google Pixel 2, I think this is still a lot better in terms of standby time, because Google has done a fantastic job optimizing the software with the hardware. So if you're looking for another alternative, I definitely recommend the Google Pixel 2 over the S9 just in terms of battery life, because it's a lot better than this guy. All right, our last topic to discuss here is camera performance. And Samsung has added a few features to make it look like a compelling upgrade over the Galaxy S8. But let me walk you through what exactly they've done here. So it features the same 12 megapixel sensor like the S8, but they've added a variable aperture mode, meaning you can switch between two different f-stops. In this case, between f2.4 and f1.5, which is incredible considering how much light it can let in darker scenarios. Now, do I see myself taking advantage of this feature? Maybe, maybe not. I shoot most of my pictures in auto mode with HDR on a smartphone, and in this case, the S9 automatically detects lighting conditions and adjusts the aperture accordingly. But if you want full control of that, as well as shutter speed, ISO, white balance, etc., Samsung's Pro mode is the way to go. And there is this. So this is an example of AR emoji. I'm not exactly sure how I'm supposed to react to this. Definitely the tracking is pretty weird. It's not as accurate like what you'd find with emojis on the iPhones. But I guess this is Samsung's way of responding to Apple's offering. And I don't see myself using this feature at all. So I don't know. I don't know how to react to this. Another thing to mention here with the AR emoji stuff is that once you've created your avatar, Samsung automatically generates a handful of animated emojis with different expressions. So if this is something that you're interested in, the S9 could be a good option. Video recording has also improved. Now you can shoot up to 4K at 60 frames per second, 1080p up to 240 frames per second, and 720p up to a whopping 960 frames per second. Or in other words, known as super slow motion. You can shoot that both in auto or manual. So for instance, if you're in auto mode, all you have to do is tap the record button and the sensor will automatically detect objects that are in the square. And when there's a motion, it'll trigger slow motion. Whereas with manual, you'd have to tap the slow motion icon to capture that motion. The results are pretty interesting. It's not the best quality out there because it's 720p, but the option to shoot 1080p at 240 frames per second is a fantastic alternative. It's a lot better in terms of quality, and while you're losing a bit on the frame rate side, I think it's okay. Pictures, on the other hand, were good. There's great dynamic range and the sensor does a really good job capturing detail, although I've ran into times where it would accidentally overexpose for a particular shot, destroying the shadows. The colors are of course nice and vibrant, just like what you would expect from a Samsung device, but personally, I still prefer the image coming out of the Pixel 2 just because it does a much better job processing HDR
Video test from the Samsung Galaxy S9. Currently shooting 4K at 60 frames per second, but my premiere timeline is 24p, so I guess you might notice a little bit of jitter. As you can see, the sensor does come with image stabilization, so it does a really good job stabilizing the footage. Here's a quick test of the autofocusing. Works really well. And as I'm walking down this pathway, I'm actually really impressed with the video quality coming out of the S9. There's good dynamic range, autofocusing is great, colors are nice and vibrant. For surprisingly, it doesn't overexpose that well, or it doesn't blow out the highlights, which is great. But let me know what you guys think about the video quality in the comments.
Now, portrait mode has sort of made its way into the S9, but it's renamed as selective focus. Essentially, this allows the user to shift focus between subjects after taking the picture. You can't necessarily adjust the blurriness of the background like the Note 8 or the S9, because both those devices feature 2 cameras. But once again, it's nowhere as good as the Pixel 2. Same story goes for the selfie camera too. The sensor on my sample, for some reason, overexposes a little bit for the highlights. Not exactly sure what's going on, but overall, I'm not that impressed with the camera performance on the S9. So I think it's about time to wrap my thoughts on the Galaxy S9. It's a minor improvement over the S8. If you are a current S8 owner, I wouldn't recommend hopping onto the S9 right away because you're not really getting that much in terms of paying that premium. For one, the design is almost identical. Sure, they relocated the fingerprint reader, which is great. But rest aside, you're getting the same display with the same resolution. One of the cool things is they've actually included dual front-facing speakers or dual speakers this time. So you have one firing it from the bottom and one of them firing from the earpiece. So it gives you a nice dual stereo imaging, which is great, which the S8 didn't have. And the camera improvements might not seem like a major one unless if you really need to take advantage of super slow motion and maybe the variable aperture mode. If you see yourself taking advantage of that, and of course taking advantage of Samsung's Pro mode, and of course maybe get accustomed to the Samsung related features, then the S9 might seem like a pretty good option. But I just personally can't recommend this phone. And there are a few reasons for that. One, I'm not really a fan of Samsung's software experience. It's not the best. I'm more of a stock Android type of guy. I prefer the experience coming out of the Pixel 2 over the S9. And to be honest, you're really not getting that much in terms of features when compared to the Pixel 2. For example, the battery life is a lot better on this guy when compared to the S9. The camera is, of course, a lot better on the Pixel 2 when compared to the S9. And while the display might seem a lot better on the S9 compared to the Pixel 2 because this has a 1080p display compared to a QHD Plus display, I really don't care about that. It's just, what I care about is something that functions. And I think Pixel 2 is functional, whereas the S9 is not, because the curved screen, not a fan of that. It gets super slippery. Glass backs, not a fan of that. It gets super slippery. It's a fingerprint magnet, not my best. And the one major thing that threw me off totally while using this device was, Samsung just deciding to remove that mobile data toggle on the Quick Settings app. It's just, I'm not sure why they decided to do it, but I'm really disappointed in that decision. I just can't. Pricing on the S9 starts at $720 and it can vary depending on carriers. And in Canada, there are 2 color options that you can choose from. There's titanium gray and lilac purple. I prefer titanium gray, but I also would have preferred to see midnight black enter the Canadian market. But unfortunately, we don't have that option. Quick note on performance. I know I haven't mentioned that in the review, but there's just nothing really to talk about because it's got a flagship processor in it, 4 gigs of RAM, and it just flies through multitasking. Expect blazing fast performance. You're not going to notice any slowdowns, and I didn't notice any slowdowns over my testing period, so that's nice. Although, one thing that I'm kind of aware of or a little worried about is the device receiving constant updates later on. I'm not sure when the 8.1 update is going to roll out in the S9. Hopefully they'll roll it out soon, but that is something to keep in mind. So that about wraps up my long-term review of the Samsung Galaxy S9. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this device. What do you guys think about it? If you're an existing S8 owner, would you actually consider upgrading to the S9? Or if you are coming from the S6 or the S7, or even if you're thinking about switching from an iPhone, would you consider the S9? Let me know in the comments down below. I'm Eber with HardwareCanucks. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.